I came to cold water with nothing but a rusted key and a fractured past. I thought I was searching for peace, but I was about to uncover a legacy, a battle, and a truth that would reshape my soul. This isn't just my story, it's my ancestors, my people's, and it begins the moment I chose to stop running and start remembering. The day I returned to Coldwater, Montana, the air carried a strange mixture of memories and dread. The landscape hadn't changed much, the same rugged hills, the whisper of pines, the distant call of hawks circling above. But I had changed. My name is Brooks Anderson, a history teacher from Denver, and I haven't been back to my childhood home since my parents' funeral a decade ago. That place was more than a house. It was a museum of pain and silence. When the letter arrived from the Coldwater County office, informing me I had inherited the house, I hesitated. My older brother Spencer had always said the house would crumble before I ever got the keys. And yet, there I was, keys cold in my palm, standing before the weathered porch of a two-story log home, the kind that seemed born from the land rather than built. The front door groaned as I pushed it open. Dust danced in the golden beams of afternoon sunlight filtering through broken blinds. The air smelled of cedar, mothballs, and forgotten time. I stepped in cautiously, almost expecting the ghosts of old arguments and cold silences to rush me at the threshold. Instead, there was stillness. Every corner of the house whispered stories. The worn rocking chair where my mother used to sit with her sewing, the old record player still holding the last vinyl she ever played, and the faded photograph of my grandfather and his Lakota regalia silent guardian on the mantel. I hadn't thought of him in years. My grandfather Samuel Whitefeather was a full-blooded Lakota who married into our family and raised my mother with the dual identity of Western norms and native wisdom. He died when I was 12, but I remember his stories. His voice like gravel and thunder, telling me about the spirits in the wind, the lessons of the earth. My father, a proud military man, dismissed most of that as superstition. Stories don't feed a family, he used to say. I wandered upstairs, heart heavy, feet dragging like I was walking through water. The master bedroom door creaked open, and I stepped inside. Everything was untouched, as if time had taken a breath and stopped the moment they passed. On the dresser, beside a yellowed copy of Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, lay a leather-bound journal. My name was scrawled across a piece of masking tape affixed to the cover. I opened it. It wasn't my father's, it was my grandfather's. For Brooks, it began, so you will know who you are. My hands trembled as I turned the pages. There were entries about rituals, about family, about the sacred objects hidden in the attic that must be protected. And then, a line that chilled me: the past always finds its way home. The next morning I climbed into the attic, flashlight in hand. The wooden stairs groaned beneath my weight, the air thick with dust and age. Hidden under a moth-eaten quilt was a large cedar chest. The lock was old, but the key from the journal fit. Inside, wrapped in cloth and love, were artifacts I had only ever heard of in whispers. A peace pipe, beaded moccasins, a ceremonial headdress, a photograph of my great-grandfather, standing beside Sitting Bull. I sat there for hours, surrounded by history and burden. Why had no one told me? Why had my father kept this hidden? By afternoon, I found myself driving to the Coldwater Cultural Preservation Center, a small building on the edge of town, surrounded by buffalo grass and painted with vibrant Lakota symbols. Inside, I met Rose Tuerk, a woman in her 60s with a braid down her back and a gaze that looked straight through you. "You're Samuel's grandson," she said before I even introduced myself. I nodded. He said you'd come, maybe not in time, but in truth. That was the beginning of my reawakening. Over the next few weeks, I worked to restore the house while spending my afternoons at the center. Rose taught me more than language or history. She taught me presence. I learned to listen, to observe. I listened to drumming circles, learned to greet elders properly, and even helped clean ceremonial grounds. Each task, each conversation, stripped away layers of cynicism I didn't know I carried. But not everyone welcomed my presence. One evening, Spencer showed up. He stood on the porch like he was claiming lost territory. "Nice house," he said. "Flatly didn't think you had it in you." "I didn't come here for the house," I replied. "I came for the truth," he scoffed. "You always were the sentimental one." "Don't be stupid, Brooks. That attic junk, it's worth a fortune. Museums, collectors, ... They're sacred artifacts, Spencer, not merchandise." His eyes narrowed. "Don't start acting like a hero. You were always the weak one. Now you're just pretending to be noble." The words stung, but they didn't break me. For the first time in my life, I didn't try to win his approval. I let him leave without a fight. That night, I reread the journal by candlelight. One passage stood out. "To carry our legacy, you must first carry yourself." A few days later, I received a phone call from the tribal council. They wanted to meet. Someone had reported that I possessed important cultural items. I brought everything with Merapt labeled "Respected." I explained their history, how I found them, and what I intended to do. The room was quiet as I finished. Then an elder named Thomas Redhawk stood. "You have not inherited artifacts, Brooks Anderson," he said. "You have inherited responsibility." From that day forward, I was not just a teacher on sabbatical. I became a steward of memory, a bridge between past and present. I enrolled in classes to better understand the Lakota language and customs. I started documenting the artifacts, learning their names, stories, and sacred uses. Children from the community began visiting the house to learn. Some brought drawings, others asked to hear the old stories. I began to feel whole. The house, once a mausoleum, breathed again. The wind through the trees no longer sounded like ghosts, but like songs. And one evening, as the sun set behind the hills, painting the sky in hues of fire and ash, I stood on the porch, holding my grandfather's journal, and whispered, "I'm home." Little did I know, the hardest part of the journey was still ahead. The early days in Coldwater moved like a slow river, quiet, unhurried, but always flowing. Each morning I woke to the sound of wind brushing pine needles, the rustle of distant deer, and the wooden creaks of a house slowly breathing back to life. The Anderson homestead, with its peeling paint and sagging porch, had seen better days, but I had decided it would see better ones again. I spent my mornings sanding old floorboards, patching leaks, and brushing layers of dust from the bookshelves. Every room held something: an old photograph, a worn-out Lakota blanket, or furniture with initials I couldn't recognize. My grandfather's spirit lingered, not like a ghost, but a quiet guardian. One afternoon, as I was rearranging some boxes in the attic, I found an old leather-bound journal tied with twine. The handwriting inside was my grandfather's. "If I'm gone by the time Brooks reads this, let him know he was always meant to return. This house is more than walls, it's our story. It's our blood, and he is part of it, even if he's forgotten that." My hands trembled. I sat down on a dusty chest and read every page. Stories of my grandfather's youth, his time with the Lakota elders, of fishing trips with his brother Henry, and the pain of watching his children turn away from their roots. There were stories of my father, too, how he struggled to balance ambition with tradition. There was a sadness in the ink, a longing that reached across time and wrapped around my chest. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the living room with the journal pressed to my heart, the stars visible through the broken window pane. Days passed, and so did a slow transformation within me. I began attending gatherings at the Lakota Cultural Center that Samuel introduced me to. The first time I walked in, the room hushed, faces turned, some warm, others wary. I was the outsider, the estranged heir who had never belonged, but I stayed. I listened. Samuel would often nudge me during stories, whispering meanings behind symbols, legends behind songs. One evening I met Rose Whitefeather, a soft-spoken elder, with fierce eyes. "You carry silence in your shoulders, Brooks," she said. I blinked. "I don't know what you mean. You walk like someone who's waiting for permission to be seen." Her words struck deep. I had always been invisible, overshadowed by Spencer's confidence, Elon's brilliance, and my parents' expectations. In this town, I could no longer hide behind excuses. At the center, I began helping with small things, carrying firewood, driving elders to events, translating old letters and cataloging items in their archives. It was there that I stumbled upon something that would change everything. One of the archive boxes held faded black and white photos. Among them I recognized the house, my house, but surrounded by dozens of Lakota people, standing shoulder to shoulder. There was a sign above the porch, "Anderson Cultural Home, EST 1956. The next few photos showed my grandfather with Samuel's father and Rose as a young woman. They were teaching, cooking, and holding children in their arms. This wasn't just a family house, it had been a community space, a sacred space. When I showed the photos to Rose, her eyes welled up. "I thought these were lost," she whispered. "Your grandfather, John, gave us everything he had. This house, it was our heart." That evening I stood on the porch staring into the open land. I understood then it was never just about reclaiming my roots. It was about restoring what was once given. But not all memories can be rebuilt with nails and good intentions. One cold morning, as frost still clung to the windows, I got a call from Ellen. "You need to come back to Denver," she said curtly. "Ellen, Mom's in the hospital. It's bad." Within hours, I was on the road, driving back to the life I had left behind. The city lights felt harsher than I remembered. At the hospital, I saw my mother lying pale against sterile sheets, her strength sapped. Spencer was there too, arms crossed, cold as ever. "You didn't even call," he hissed when we were alone. "You left everything to rot while you ran off to play with dreamcatchers." I clenched my jaw. "I'm not here to fight. No, you're here to pretend you're still part of this family." The words burned, but I didn't flinch. My time in Coldwater had changed me. I had faced harder truths than Spencer's scorn. Later, Ellen and I stood by Mom's bedside. She opened her eyes just once, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Be proud of you, Brooks." I didn't know if she meant Dad or Grandpa, maybe both. Mom passed away the next morning. The funeral was quiet. A handful of friends, a priest who barely knew her, and Spencer, barely holding it together. At the will reading, it was revealed that the house in Coldwater had been transferred fully into my name, months before Mom's condition worsened. Spencer stormed out. Back at the house in Denver, I packed my things, photos, books, clothes, but I left behind one framed award. It had my name under the title Employee of the Quarter. In the end, it meant nothing. When I returned to Coldwater, the town greeted me with more warmth than I expected. Samuel met me with a firm hug. "You came back," he said. "I never really left," I replied. With new determination I began, restoring the house not just as a home, but as a community center again. I filed for permits, met with tribal council members, and pitched the idea of rebuilding the Anderson cultural home. There was resistance. Outsiders always promised. One man said, "I'm not promising," I told him. "I'm building, you can come see it for yourself." And they did. Week by week, people returned. Elders told stories on the porch. Children learned beading in the living room. I painted the sign back above the door, just like in the old photo. But not everything was healed. Spencer hadn't spoken to me since the funeral. One afternoon, I got a letter for my cold. He was threatening legal action, claiming half the house, half the land, and the artifacts. I read it twice, then folded it and stared into the fire. My hands trembled, but not with fear. I wasn't the same man anymore. That you're not walking alone. Your ancestors are with you. I put on the necklace, feeling the coolness of the sweet grass against my skin. From that night on, whenever I doubted myself, I touched the necklace and felt my grandfather, my great-grandfather, and Samuel standing behind me. My journey of self-discovery didn't just happen in the house or the cultural center. It unfolded in small moments, in the lessons the Lakota community taught me. One day, Rose invited me to her home, where she was teaching a group of children traditional weaving. I sat there watching their tiny hands move across the looms, creating intricate patterns. Rose explained the meaning of each design: the zigzag, the lightning, the circle for the sun, the source of all life. I listened, feeling like I too was learning from scratch, like a child. "Mr. Brooks, you try weaving," a boy named Tommy called, his eyes sparkling with mischief. I laughed, shaking my head, but Rose pushed me into the chair. "Don't be shy," she said. "Everything starts with a first step." I clumsily handled the loom, tangling the threads and making the kids giggle. But when I finished a small, crooked piece of fabric, I felt a strange joy, not because I'd done well, but because I dared to try. In that moment, I realized this was the strength I'd always lacked: not the strength to compete or win, but the strength to learn, to grow, to not fear failure. But every journey has challenges. One morning, as I prepared for a Lakota language class, I received a letter from Spencer's lawyer. He was suing me, claiming ownership of the house, arguing that our parents' will was unclear. The letter hit like a punch, leaving me reeling. I'd thought my battle with Spencer was over, that he'd let go after I secured legal ownership. I was wrong. Spencer didn't just want money. He wanted to prove I wasn't worthy, that I'd always be the loser. I called Samuel and he came right away. We sat on the porch, looking at the distant mountains, and I told him everything. "I'm tired, sir," I said, my voice low. "I just want to do what's right. But why is everything so hard? Spencer, Ellen, the people trying to buy the artifacts. It feels like the whole world is against me." Samuel was quiet for a moment, then pointed to the sky where an eagle was circling. "See that eagle?" he asked. "It flies high, but not because there's no wind against it. It flies high because it knows how to use the wind to lift itself. Your challenges, Brooks, are that headwind. Don't let them knock you down. Use them to soar higher." His words gave me a new perspective. Spencer, Ellen, at the difficulties, they weren't enemies but lessons. I decided to face Spencer not with anger, but with resolve. I hired a skilled lawyer, and we prepared for the trial. In the meantime, I kept working at the center, refusing to let the lawsuit slow me down. Each day, I felt stronger, not because I was about to win the case, but because I knew I was fighting for what was right. The trial took place in Billings, a few hours' drive from Coldwater. I walked into the courtroom, facing Spencer for the first time since his visit to the house. He was still handsome, confident, but I saw an emptiness in his eyes, the emptiness of someone chasing only money. When called to testify, I told my story without holding back. I spoke of my journey to Montana, the artifacts, the cultural center, and why I couldn't let them fall into the hands of those who wouldn't honor them. "I'm not doing this for myself," I said, looking at the judge. "I'm doing this for my family, for the Lakota tribe, for those who fought to keep this legacy alive." Spencer, in contrast, spoke only of the house and artifacts' material value, insisting he deserved a share. But I saw the judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, unmoved by numbers. In the end, she ruled that the house and its contents belonged to me, citing the clarity of my parents' will and my demonstrated commitment to the legacy's cultural significance. As we left the courtroom, Spencer looked at me but said nothing. I wanted to tell him I wasn't keeping the house to spite him, that I still loved him as a brother. But I knew, at least for now, Spencer wasn't ready to listen. I just nodded and walked out, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. Back in Coldwater, I held a small ceremony to thank the community for their support. We lit a bonfire under the open sky, sang Lakota songs, and shared stories of our ancestors. I stood before everyone, No longer the timid man who'd arrived with a set of rusty keys. I was Brooks Anderson, a man who'd found inner strength not through victory, but through daring to live true to himself. I began writing a book, chronicling my story and my family's, based on my grandfather's journal. I wanted future generations, like Tommy, like the girl who gave me the beaded necklace to know they carried a precious legacy. I also dove deeper into Lakota culture, participating in ceremonies and even trying traditional hunting, though I was still a novice who made Thomas Red Hawk laugh until he cried. My happiness now lay not in what I owned, but in what I could give. Each time a child learned a Lakota word, each time the drum sounded at a ceremony, I felt I was repaying my ancestors, not with money, but with love and responsibility. One evening, standing on the porch, gazing at the star-filled sky, I felt like my grandfather was somewhere, smiling. I touched the necklace Samuel gave me and whispered, "Thank you for believing in me." The wind blew through, carrying the scent of pine, and I knew that no matter how hard this journey was, I would never walk alone. I was no longer the weak Brooks, always yielding. I was Brooks, descendant of Wakantanka, who found purpose in protecting his ancestors' legacy. And in my heart, for the first time, I was truly proud of my Lakota heritage. The seasons turned, snow returned to cold water, blanketing the fields and whispering over the mountains like a gentle reminder that life moved in cycles. Inside the house that once echoed with confusion and silence, warmth filled the walls. Laughter, stories, and even music drifted from room to room. I had grown used to the quiet rhythm of life here. Mornings spent helping Rose at the cultural center, afternoons teaching Lakota words to curious children, and evenings curled up with my grandfather's journals. But something in my spirit told me there was more to do, more beyond this valley. It began with an email. A professor from the University of Montana had read a short article one submitted to a local journal about the importance of tribal stewardship over ancestral artifacts. He invited me to speak at a panel on indigenous cultural preservation. At first, I hesitated. I still felt like an imposter, a man only just discovering who he was. But Samuel, with his ever-patient eyes, said, "If not you, who?" I traveled to Missoula with trembling hands. My talk was simple. I didn't read from notes. I told my story: the house, the fight for heritage, the children weaving patterns of the past into the future. When I finished, the room was silent. Then came applause, not loud, but long. A young Lakota woman came up to me afterward, tears in her eyes. "Thank you for reminding me who I am," she whispered. That moment changed everything. More invitations followed. I began visiting schools, tribal colleges, and even museums across the state, speaking about cultural respect and community-led preservation. With each trip I carried a pot of cold water with Miss Samuel's wisdom, Rose's warmth, the children's laughter. One day, as I stood in front of the new exhibit at the Montana Museum of History, a collection of artifacts that cold water had helped curate, saw Spencer. He stood off to the side, staring at a war lance that once belonged to our great-great-grandfather. His eyes were softer this time. "Brooks," he said. I nodded. "I've been reading your articles," he continued, "and I wanted to see what it was all about." We walked through the exhibit together. He asked questions, real ones. At the end, we stood in front of a photograph of our grandfather. Spencer looked at me. "You did well." It wasn't a reconciliation, not yet, but it was a beginning. Back in Coldwater, the cultural center expanded. We started offering weekend retreats for tribal youth, bringing in elders to teach traditional knowledge. I helped coordinate funding using the proceeds from my book, which had quietly become a regional bestseller. And one spring morning, as snow melted and the ground gave way to new life, we planted a healing garden beside the house. Each herb and plant was chosen by the elders: sweetgrass, sage, cedar, a living tribute. That evening the community gathered again. Drums echoed into the twilight, and children danced with joyful abandon. I stood with Samuel, watching the firelight flicker. "You've come far, Brooks," he said. I smiled. "We've come far." I still wore the necklace, still touched it when the world felt uncertain. But now, I carried more than their memory, I carried their dreams. As the stars bloomed overhead, I knew my journey had not ended, it had just begun. I was Brooks Anderson, a man born of legacy, tempered by fire, and finally